Hello, welcome to another episode of CripChat, your weekly podcast on everything disability. Tonight is a special episode. We are joined by two of my heroes and role models, Craig Wallace and Samantha Connor. As usual, we are joined by Ibby and David. How are you?
Good.
Yeah, I'm doing good, Jonathan. Yeah, how are you,
I'm all
David?
good. I'm all good, thank you.
No,
Sorry, there might be a bit of noise background in my area, but I'm going to try muting myself from
it's all
that.
good, it's all good. And how are you, Samantha?
Yeah, I'm good. I always feel a bit guilty when I'm speaking to anyone from the east because I'm in WA. So, where we don't have anything locked down. But we had that a little bit earlier this year. So, yeah.
No, it's good to connect with our Western Australians.
Yeah,
It's
we're
all
a
good.
little bit left out over here sometimes. Yeah.
Nah, it's all good, it's all good. So, Jonathan, what are we going to be talking about today?
Tonight we're talking about the NDIS and the so-called independent assessment.
Yeah.
I find ironic since they are not going to be independent at all.
I was at a meeting, Jonathan, and someone raised that, and the answer was that they'll be independent of the participant, which I thought was an interesting answer.
And we will get a choice of horrible providers to choose from, but we can't choose our own provider.
So our independence is limited, is it?
What was that, Ibby?
We're only limited to choose only a few.
Sorry, I didn't catch that.
No, sorry about that. I'm just saying that our independence is limited. Is that right?
Yeah, it's basically the idea is instead of coming to a review or entering the scheme for the first time as a new participant, with your kind of evidence in hand, which is what we'd have to do before. And it really does depend on, for people, how old they are, if they've got a disability from birth, that kind of thing. And then we're going to be assessed by an allied health provider who is going to observe us for 20 minutes in our homes. And on that 20-minute assessment, they're going to run us through some diagnostic tools that are standardized things and ask us some questions. And then they're going to allocate us a package of supports based on that. So, a lot of us have got big concerns about that people who don't know us and who might not know anything about our disabilities and our lives are going to sort of be making those, doing that, doing those assessments, and that's going to be what, the rest of our funding is going to be based on. So, really big concerns about what independent looks like for us, I guess.
Yeah, it's... Now, what are your thoughts on that, Craig?
Yes, I guess I'm really concerned by what this does to the nature of entry into the whole scheme. So the idea with the NDIS when we started it was that it would be people bringing their own experiences and assessments about the barriers and the lack of opportunities and the stigma that they were experiencing, plus evidence from doctors and paediatricians and mental health workers who actually had travelled with them over time and who understood the supports and therapies and equipment that they need. And I think what has happened is the government has heard from parents and people with disabilities that they're having trouble accessing OTs and physios and other people, affording those people to provide them with advice about the supports that they best need. And they've kind of twisted that, if you like, into a policy proposal that everybody in the whole scheme is going to be reassessed over the next 24 months ago as to whether they get funding at all. And the trade-off is meant to be that it only happens at life stages. But I think that's really problematic because we're all having, lots of life stage changes every time our needs for equipment change or our circumstances change, and they've changed a lot this year.
Yeah, that's right. No, I agree with you, Craig. We do go through changes every now and so in our lives, and so having that review every single time is it's daunting. I think it's gonna be very hard on us because also the waiting time as well. Things change very quickly.
Yeah, that's right. I think there's also some really big concerns from family members of people who, don't have their own voice, and people who aren't supported by family, who might have really complex care needs, and who, it's not just about their line is kind of, we want to assess, what you can do, which sounds a little bit like the line that they use when they changed the impairment tables for DSP. We all know how that turned out. And, that whole thing about, we want to assess what you can do doesn't really take into consideration, what our lives are like in terms of what we want to do, what our goals are. There's, which is what the NDIS is supposed to be about, right? It's about letting us get what we need to be who we are and to be full and equal participants in society, not just in a scheme. So, and there's also concerns that people have about, not being able to be assessed in 20 minutes is a really big thing because a lot of people have episodic disabilities. So, on the day that your assessor turns up, you might be having a good day and then you might be in bed for 3 weeks. So, there's some really big concerns about the way that they're planning to do this and also the way they've gone about doing this as well.
So you're trying to tell me that what's good now? They're gonna reassess everyone every time they need a review. The NDIS finishes.
Yeah, they want to. From what I understand, and my understanding is based on leaked documents because we've had some very little information publicly for a long time. That they want to do planned assessments at particular life stages, all new entrants, and then they're going to change the way that they do reviews. So rather than do annual reviews, which I kind of agree with as well, I think that's maybe a positive thing. But they're going to do potentially unscheduled reviews, and they're going to do reviews at different times rather than just once a year. So I think people will be hit with a bunch of uncertainty and distress and anxiety about that. And certainly a lot of people have said that already. So we really have not got a huge amount of information about the way that this is planned to roll out, but it's due to the documents that we have is say that it's due to start in February of next year. So we're talking about this very late.
Okay, so February. I've got a concern. Now, I've been with a NDIS provider, like a company that used to takes me to the gym, and now they're telling me they're not going to do NDIS anymore. They're going to just do old people. Is that I know why, because we got control now.
I think it's also about the pricing. When you say,
pricing.
Sam, like like this isn't the only thing that's wrong with the NDIS, and one of the things that's happened in the past couple of days is that we've been wanting to make really clear that actually it's a bit of a crunch point for the NDIS, like them suddenly dropping this on us on a Friday, and that we've gradually over time been moving further and further away from the NDIS that we want. Like the price guide is just ridiculous. And some of the rules out of this, they look like they are been set in the 1980s to say they will only fund a shower chair to say $1,500, or they will only fund disabled driver modifications if they're on a car that's been purchased in the last 5 years. Have these people actually seen any of the cars that have come out in the last 5 years? Like they are all kind of high, wide SUV style vehicles that certainly if you're a self-driving disabled person, you don't have a hope of actually using, and they cost a bomb. So it's just ridiculous. The rules and the inflexibility of this NDIS that was meant to belong to all of us is really disturbing. Exactly. And it's just the latest example of how bad things are getting.
And so there's ridiculous rules, around the, it just seems to be that the only people who are sort of getting anything out of the NDIS really are some of the providers,
the CEOs.
Big end of town, the CEOs. And disabled people don't.
Yeah, isn't the NDIS all about voice control?
Sorry, what was that?
Ibby, ask the question again.
We missed a bit of that, Ibby.
He sounds like he's not.
Yeah, I know that's what I'm saying. Isn't the NDIS all about voice control?
Yeah, that was what it meant to be. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I mean, you have the right, if your provider is no longer providing services, then, you do have the right to, to go and get another provider to take you to the gym. But that also depends on the way that people are able to spend their money. Some people are told that they're not able to self-manage when they want to, so they have to be agency managed or plan managed. If you're agency managed, that means that you can only use, registered providers of services, which is people who pay, $12,000 a year to go and get an audit. And for people, I live in the country, and I can tell you after ringing around this week, there's no providers in my region at all who are taking on new clients. So, so we're really concerned as well about what this might mean for the whole, not just the whole NDIS, but also like the whole market, so market being the people who provide services for disabled people. What happens if there's less people in the scheme because we've all been booted out or not able to get in? If those providers go broke, then that also impacts on people who are in the scheme and okay. So it's a really big issue that we think needs to be halted until we can have a look at it properly, preferably canned, I reckon. I think it's a bloody bad idea. But I think there's some really big concerns that people have been raising.
So you could say it's the hourly rate they are paying less than usual.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear you say that. And I'm going to say, like, it's actually good to be talking to people on the other side of Parramatta Road about disability issues, because I don't think that happens enough, including in some of the organisations that I've seen. is we really need to be hearing these stories, and they need to be going to the people that are meant to represent us through disabled people's organisations. And the reality is that sometimes that's a bit inconsistent, and sometimes it is only the loudest voices that come through. And what I'm hearing on the ground, what I'm sure Sam hears through her NDIS grassroots page, which is 22,000 people. There are people out there every day telling these kind of stories. But I suspect, the story about the gym that you visit isn't actually reaching the Independent Advisory Council or the NDIS board, and it certainly isn't getting up to Martin Hoffman, the CEO, or Stuart Robert. And they need to be actually hearing what is happening to ordinary disabled people on the ground through this scheme. Out in Bankstown, out at Silverwater, Blue Mountains, those areas where I think actually disability services are themselves thin on the ground, and some of the mainstream services are only getting used to this. We need your voices in the disability rights movement really making that clear. You're okay, I think, a little bit better if you're in a city. You're probably a little bit better if you're in Canberra like me, but there's an awful lot of people that are in trouble, outside in our regional centres, in our big suburban outlier areas.
What do you advise people to do? Send an email in, or
I reckon if you belong to a diagnostic group or a cross disability group, it doesn't really matter. People have got their own voices, and you can do what Craig suggests and talk directly to your disabled persons organisation, or family support organisation, and say, look, what are you doing to represent my issue? This is my situation. The other thing that you can do is directly advocate and talk to your local MP, your local federal MP or local member of parliament, and say, look, these are the concerns that I have. I want to know what you're doing for disabled people in your electorate to make sure that we're going to be okay through all this. So, and make it really clear that we fought for the NDIS, and we fought for an NDIS that would work for us, and we, expect it to work for us, and and just make sure that your voice is heard, I think.
Yeah, and I think maybe it's time for a bit of direct action as well. One of the things that we did yesterday, there were a whole bunch of advocates from around Australia taking part in a thing called the NDIS crawl, where there were people, crawling up outside NDIS offices, making it clear that we shouldn't have to crawl on our hands and knees for supports, holding vigils, but also just doing a whole stack of stuff on social media to show, doing our own mock assessments to show how ridiculous this idea was. I think there's immense value in us, we need to get our organisations actually doing stuff for us, but we can't wait for them. So I think, if we can do stuff like actually ringing talkback radio shows, ringing your local MP, especially if it's a coalition MP, and making it clear that you're not happy about this, writing letters to the EDA, doing the social media stuff, and the hashtags NDIS crawl was taken off a bit. It was trending 6 in Australia yesterday. We need to build some momentum about this and not let them think that just because we're in COVID-19 and we're all kind of trapped at home, that the disability rights movement has kind of died with it and stopped being active. We've got a moment where at the moment everybody's stuck inside, so we can be as active as anyone else.
And, for people who aren't comfortable talking about their personal situation, or who, who actually haven't connected with many more disabled people as well, I think there's a really good opportunity here to talk to other disabled people and other people in the movement, and, build awareness with other people, and, say, this is what I know about this. How is this going to work for you? And start those conversations and give other people the opportunity to tell their stories as well. Because I think, talking to other MAD people from my perspective, this is a huge issue for people with psychosocial disability. They're also using standardized assessment tools like Vineland 3 and HUDAS, which won't work for a bunch of people. So there's some really big concerns from people in different communities. If we as disabled people can advocate really strongly within our own networks and make sure we're supporting other disabled people to have their voice heard, then I think that can be a really positive thing too, and really needed to make change right now.
Yep. Exactly.
Do you think we should
can anyone
write up a petition?
Yeah.
Do you think we should write up a petition?
I think there's one
That
going
way-
already on
Yeah,
social media,
yes,
I think. And
yeah.
I think using a lot of people have been using Twitter, if you've got Twitter, and using that hashtag NDIS crawl, and also NDIS assessors, and tagging in the relevant minister, which is Stuart Robert, and I guess also, the opposition leader. People have been talking to Bill Shorten, who was also tweeting about NDIS crawl yesterday. I think it's whatever platform you usually use, and if you don't have that, use your phone. If you don't have a phone, then write a letter. It's really just about making your voice heard through as many platforms as you can, really.
True. Yeah.
And
It's all about
telling
the
stories.
voice choice and control.
We should put one up on Facebook. That way, I see a lot of people join. I do some. I've done petitions, like signed petitions while it's on Facebook, and then from there pass it on, or on Messenger, or on WhatsApp.
Yeah, cool.
Whatever social media is out there.
Being visually impaired, I'm not able to write it up, but some people can guide me and help me.
Can I just say that probably nothing actually works as good as having a personal, relatable story. Like, I know I'm guilty of this, sometimes talking in kind of really broad, high-level generalities because I'm a policy wonk, right? But when it actually comes down to it, this is about a disabled person out in community where there's no services, not being able to access this stuff that they need, and suddenly being really worried that a doctor's going to land on their doorstep and throw them off the scheme, and what that's meaning in your life. And actually to get those stories from ordinary people out in front of MPs and the media and to start collecting them, I think is really, really important. Like, let's not make this so high level and about Productivity Commission and tune reports and other bits of paper. If we actually start focusing on what does this mean for ordinary people, we start to cut through. I mean, we shouldn't forget that the whole Australian community is funding the NDIS and originally signed onto it. There's a bit out of the Medicare levy that's going to fund the scheme. I don't really think that the Australian people hate us, like they want this scheme to succeed, and they're actually as confused as the rest of us as to why and how this is going wrong, and amplifying that story and getting your voices heard is just really important. So I'm seeing some people on the chat saying they're going to do the mock assessments and all the rest of it. That's really important.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's I think it can be really hard telling those stories, and as well. But one of the things that I've been raising is about for those among us who have got medical trauma. I've got trauma related to abuse from when I was a kid, and so I can remember at the beginning of the year I went in for a stay at a mental health unit, and the part of the doctor's policy in the unit was to do an assessment, a mobility assessment, which is just kind of like a bit of a normal thing in some places, where they'll ask you a few questions about whether you can transfer. I mean, you're there for your brain, not for your body, and so it shouldn't be a really big deal. I'm a wheelchair user, and so when I went into the mental health unit, the doctor that I had was really risk averse, and so he sent an OT and a physio to come in, which was, both males, to come in and do the whole, run their hands over your body for a couple of hours, which is never a great thing for an abuse victim who's in the mental health unit for the purposes of addressing abuse, And so I don't think they understand the trauma that a lot of us have had. A lot of us have had surgeries or intrusive medical tests, you know, and a lot of hospital experience. And the thought of being assessed, even when it's not tied to, you know, whether you're going to get funding just to be able to live your life, is a really, really big thing for a lot of people. So I think, you know, if you're able to tell those stories, I think that's stuff that non-disabled people might not necessarily understand. And I think those stories are really important too.
Yeah. In terms of the NDIS prices, I realize they've been going up every like 6 months or so. Are they? When are they gonna stop going up? They're gonna reach $100 just for an hour of personal care. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, I think there's you know, there's a lot of concerns that we have around you know, not just, I guess, the pricing, but also the availability of support workers. Some of this stuff is about, you know, we've got a really low paid workforce here, so people are only sort of getting 19 or 20 bucks an hour. And you know, when you have somebody who's getting paid 19 or 20 bucks an hour, especially right now, why wouldn't you want to go off onto JobKeeper? You know, really. There's, you know, rather than go to work. So, you know, so we've got issues where we actually need to say, okay, we need to have a well-paid, valued, competent workforce that is available everywhere in Australia, that we have, you know, that they look at disability care and support and all of those related occupations as careers rather than just as jobs. You know, it shouldn't be the choice of being a taxi driver or a barmaid or, you know, or being a disability support worker, because you're looking after, you know, really important issues in people's day-to-day lives. So, you know, but then we need to find that balance between making sure that people on the ground are actually paid a decent wage for a good day's work, and then also making sure we've got a sustainable scheme where, you know, we're able to not just keep giving money to the big CEOs or to the flash offices and to the new company cars and whatever, you know. So we need to, this is why we had a scheme where we were supposed to be able to self-direct our services and you know, make sure that we're actually paid directly for care if we're able to. And I think they're things that there needs to be a lot more attention about market, and we need to make sure that it doesn't just automatically go to the providers, you know, without any accountability as well for the care and the services that they're delivering.
And the more that this happens, and the less that the prices keep up with reality, the more you wind up with the kind of world that we're in retail, right? So kind of think about Woolies and Coles. Like, you just keep getting bigger and bigger amalgamated providers because they can run what are called economies of scale. They can basically do stuff cheaper and cheaper and employ workers on casual contracts. And that's what some of these outfits are doing. And so you lose the small bespoke, more small kind of tailored providers that would actually be a bit flexible and come out and help. Like, one of the ones that I've been really worried about for a while is technical aid for disabled. I don't know if you guys have come across them, but there are, you know, a great group of retired volunteer engineers, and you know, sometimes the service is a bit patchy, but generally really good. And they'll come out and they'll do a fix on something that no one else will be bothered to fix because the particular item has stopped being made or it's gone out of business. What does this look like for them when they've got a really, you know, the work that they're getting in is patchy, the flow is patchy? I worry that we're going to see some of those small providers disappear. And we've certainly seen that in the ACT where I live. And there's now only one provider of disabled driver modifications, only one really big provider of mobility assistance, and to be honest, they're not very customer centric and good, and they just churn out stuff that is off the shelf. If we were talking about another industry that was undergoing change like this, like the car industry, you would have a whole lot of industry assistance and what's called industry development to try and get the sector up, get it ready, get it skilled up, make sure you had the commercial side of it worked out. None of that's happened with the NDIS.
And especially this thing about independent assessors, there's been a bit of chatter about, that this is fear-mongering and that people will be okay with this. But one of the really big concerns, even if you have your particular views about, what independent assessments might look like, or your type of disability is pretty straightforward and clear-cut, and you don't think there's much of a problem. They held a trial over 2 years. They held two. They held one which was about equipment and modifications, that trial site. Then they had another trial which was cut short on the 19th of March of this year. And then a few days before that, they released the tender to say, okay, well, we're going to contract an organisation to have these independent assessors. Some advocates tried to FOI the evaluation document and were told that no, they couldn't see that because that was part of their deliberations, which means, them making up their, mind about different parts of what this is going to look like. But it's a really big concern that people haven't been, there's an idea about consultation. Consultation isn't just talking at the sector. It's not talking at organisations. It's actually having a conversation with disabled people and saying, look, we think we could possibly do this. What do you reckon? Us coming back and saying, well, that's great, or no, that's terrible, or maybe you could do this, And so there's really been none of that. They're going to start this trial again, but they're starting the trial with the intention of introducing this thing in February of next year. So that's a really big problem for me. I mean, really, you should, if you hold a trial and then you look at what happened and you look at how many people were happy, and then you have a conversation with everybody involved, and especially people like us who will be, in receipt of services from the NDIS.
Yeah. So simply put, the government needs to be more involved. With the NDIS. Provide more support for people that are on the NDIS.
All they're trying to say, I reckon, needs more competition from other providers.
Yeah, we might not have any other competition if all of the little providers go broke. So it'd be a bit hard if there were only, not very many providers providing services for people.
Because if we got more competition, then more people will have more jobs, and the prices can be varied.
That's right, yeah. And that's what healthy markets are supposed to look like. They're supposed to, in a way, kind of regulate themselves with having healthy competition where people will, people will make sure that they're not charging too much, or
and everyone can shop around.
Yeah. And there's, as Craig was saying, the little organisations that do individual things, like there's some people who have really specific support needs, some people who only need a little bit of support, and then there's some people who have very specific needs. Oh, you're in the blind and vision impaired community, so if you're in a country town, what does that look like if you need someone to do orientation with you around a workplace, or that kind of stuff, or guide dog training, or they're very, very specific things that not all service providers do. So they're the sorts of things that I guess I'm concerned about, and especially about the regions and services for Aboriginal people in regional and remote Australia. What's that going to look like? So it's a concern.
And I'd also add that markets never regulate themselves, right? Like, I mean, even in the kind of regular markets, that's why you got things like Choice Magazine. That's why you've got a competition commission and consumer law. And if you don't have those things, you just get a kind of Wild West where people do whatever they want. And we've got a fair bit of that in disability. And that really trails into both poor service, but also some of the appalling instances of abuse and neglect that we've been seeing in the disability sector. And if you want a vision of what the future looks like, just look at the kind of crap that's coming out of aged care. Sorry, Jonathan, I shouldn't be using those words on your program, but I mean, if you actually look at what's coming out of those privatisation reforms in the aged care sector, they are just treating people like dirt, and they have been, because they've allowed the big moneyed operators to come in and run the joint for profit without any care for people. And if we're going to be assessed by those people to get into the NDIS and they're going to run services, that's not what any of us signed up to. So, we actually need good information about what good services are. So if we're going to be given money, we can actually throw it away from those kind of services and start purchasing other things so that they don't eat up everything else. And we also need to have a lot more choice and a lot more good tools to make those decisions. And we're talking to some of the people that have got the least power in these markets.
Is there a website that we can compare other services and compare the costs of each service and what they should be and how much they can charge for them?
There's an NDIS price that gets updated every 6 months or so.
They sort of tried that for a few different platforms. They had things like clickability, which is still going, but I think it's been a bit variable, and some of that is to do with the fact that disabled people don't always necessarily talk about the quality of service that they're getting, because people have got huge power over us, right? So if you have a terrible provider, you live in a group home, and they're also your landlord, what does that look like? If you say something bad, then you might be out on the street. So I think that's.
We can do that with being anonymous also.
Yeah, that's right. And I think the thing that's worked really well for disabled people has been local stuff that's word of mouth, stuff in diagnostic communities that's word of mouth. I know that I have pretty strong networks with other autistic people. I'm in a group called WA3, which is a group of 200 or 300 autistic people in Western Australia. And, just even stuff about, finding a decent psychiatrist or psychologist. We'll all talk amongst ourselves in our peer support group about who's good, who's autistic friendly, and we'll ask people for recommendations. And I think that's the thing that's worked really well traditionally for us for a long time. I don't think it's so much formal platforms, sadly.
Yeah, no, I guess
maybe.
Sorry, David.
Maybe we can get people to recommend the better ones and what and rate them, but we won't put up the people, give suggestions to people of who are good ones, which providers are good and which ranking and comments, but without comments that people have said about different providers. That way, no one's actually named, but people get feedback.
I think that's a good idea. Like a TripAdvisor or something where you can actually rate and it has consequences if you do so. And, if the NDIS was actually doing what they said they'd do at the start of the scheme, which was they were going to have grassroots advisory groups, in the pilot sites and the ACT, but, we need one in Tudray, we need one out at Bankstown, we need them up in the Blue Mountains, we need them in all the areas, particularly where they've got thin markets. I mean, I'm interested to know from, I guess, everybody here, when is the last time you actually had an opportunity to feed back to the NDIA? Have they called you? Have they actually called you since COVID-19 started? There just doesn't seem to be this communication. Maybe it's just me. They've just lost my phone number, but I don't know about you guys, but I haven't heard from them.
They've also lost my phone number as well. They haven't been in contact with me. But I guess back to what I was saying, I guess one of the most powerful tools when it comes to sharing knowledge and information with each other is the peer support groups. So
Yeah.
I'm involved with the peer support groups, and look,
Yeah.
I think it works well for most people. They can share their knowledge, information about the NDIS. What works well, what needs to be improved. Yeah, and we go from there. So it's all about the peer support. But
Yeah.
we need, as a community, we need to get together and just tackle this thing.
Yeah.
Ensure everyone gets a figure.
And I think did you guys all hear about that organisation Integrity Care in South Australia?
Yeah.
Yeah, that right. So that was an organisation that was supposedly NDIS registered. So with the systems that they have, you've got this an NDIS registered organisation is supposed to be safer. It's supposed to be better. It means that somebody from the NDIS Quality and Safeguards Commission has made sure that all of their policies and procedures are tickety-boo, that everybody is doing the right thing. And so yet this woman had died in awful, awful circumstances in South Australia, and, really big problems have come to light. So, I mean, when the report came out about that the other day, it sort of appeared that nobody from the NDIS had sort of, or from what I understand, had really talked to the woman who died directly. They only talked to the organisation. So I think, the stuff that Craig's saying, as well as, we've got peer support groups to keep us safe and to make sure we've got good services and we're getting the services we need. But I think also there's a responsibility from the people who are the funders, so the NDIA. If they're saying that they've got registered providers of support, they should be talking to us to find out if they're good or if they're terrible, and rather than just listening to the provider saying that they're good or not, really. And they should be supporting and helping the little organisations, the ones that we're using, that we think are doing a good job, and the ones that we support and that are supporting us. So I think there's a lot that they could do better, and it's a shame that they don't sort of really seem to be talking directly to us. We're just the people who are left out of the conversation all the time.
Yeah. True.
Yeah.
I agree, Yeah, they should come directly to us.
Well, if they do what I said before, and if we can get something organised where we can have people rating the providers and whoever they like, and it can show good comments on them and negative comments on others. That way, people have a choice, and people have no, and bad providers have no choice but to up their game.
Are you guys connected in with peer support groups of your own, like in your local communities?
Yeah, we've got a lot of peer support happening around here in Sydney.
Oh, cool.
And so we meet up like once every week. Well, we're now doing it online due to the COVID, but a lot of people are engaging, and we're sharing each other's stories. And it's a good way to connect with each other.
And what about you, David? Have you got other groups of disabled people that you know?
Well, we're Ibby and I are in the same sort of region,
you're in the same area.
Okay, yeah.
And we have very similar groups.
Yeah, so most of our peer support groups correlate with each other.
Yeah, cool. And Jonathan, you're everywhere, so you're everyone.
Yeah.
That's cool.
So it's a sort of Southwest Sydney peer support group. It's interesting. Like, I think that NDIS are good at sort of setting those things up and providing funding under what's called ILC to make them happen. But I don't think they're good at engaging with them. Like, I mean, it'd be interesting to see why aren't they on this? They could be on this show actually talking to us and engaging with people with disabilities. I'd be in that if one of the board members or if Martin Hoffman wants to come on the show and hear concerns from ordinary people with disabilities. Let's get that happening.
Yep. And I agree.
That's your job, Jonathan. Get a meeting with Martin Hoffman.
Yeah.
And when you're talking to him, ask him why there's no bloody disabled people on the board anymore. Because John Walsh, who I really liked and thought a lot of, who's a physically disabled guy, resigned, coincidentally, about a month ago, just before all of this stuff about independent assessments happened. I reckon it would be really, one of the things that can go really wrong is, that saying, nothing about us without us. Things go pear-shaped when we're not in conversations and when we don't have any say in things. The fact that we've got a board running the NDIS that doesn't have any disabled people or, disabled people who are disclosing they're disabled is a really big problem for me. I think it shouldn't just be the independent advisory council and workers. It should be the people running these things that are people that are like us and who are running this program.
I agree with you. The people that run Vision Australia are practically, most of them are visually impaired.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
if you understand the disability, you'll know more how to treat others that have very similar disabilities and range of disabilities.
Yeah. Yeah, it's all about the lived experience, I think.
Yeah, lived experience and being able to educate others about those lived experiences.
It's weird, like our sector, though. Sometimes I actually think that disability organisations and bureaucracies that are about disability are sometimes the worst at actually including people with disabilities, truly including, in other words, devolving power to them and sharing power with them, than other organisations. I mean, of all the places that I've worked, it's actually been in disability organisations where I've seen the most stigma and discrimination and exclusion of other disabled people. I don't know what that is, whether it's familiarity breeding contempt or they just think they've got a handle on the issues and they know best. But we actually need to do some work to change culture within disability land as well, would be my observation. The NDIS has probably picked up on that and saying, well, these people don't listen to each other. Why should we bother?
Yeah, that's true. And not just people, Craig and I both were on TV last week talking about this issue around independent assessors. And I know that that's because we both don't have the communication difference, Jonathan does, and is less likely to get airtime, and Jonathan's voice is as important or more important than either of ours, as is anybody who doesn't have a literal voice, people who communicate differently, people who think differently. There's a real, the more different you are, the less likely we are to be given a voice and to be heard. And I think in the disability movement, there's been a kind of trend to have mostly physically disabled people, also some blind people as well, but people who are acceptable to the non-disableds, really. People with intellectual disability and autism are the biggest cohort in the NDIS. And so when we're having this conversation, this should be something that's actually, by people who are the stakeholders in this, right? So people who are receiving support, and especially people who don't have the luxury of being able to just go, well, I can just back out of this. It's a bit too hard and I'm not going to get disability care and support. It should be the people who have got the most skin in the game, who have got the loudest voice in this. So, yeah, I agree with you, Craig, that we really need to make sure that we've got inclusive spaces for disabled persons organisations and in anything around disability, including places like Vision Australia, where, you make sure that it's inclusive of everybody who's going to be affected by whatever change you're proposing.
Yep. And I totally agree with you, Samantha. I think Jonathan, is the voice of Australian disability, and in saying that everyone has that voice and the choice and the control to, run their own lives. So why should anyone be left out of the NDIS?
That's it.
Or out of our own organisations that are meant to represent us. I mean, it's actually, I struggle to think, Ibby, of many people in disability rights movement that are sort of south of Parramatta Road, to be honest. Like at the leadership level, it tends to be people in the sort of the inner cities, often with the best of intentions, but we actually aren't seeing that voice. Like, we know that the sprawling parts of New South Wales are Campbelltown, it is the outer west, but it also is the case in, the southern hills of Adelaide and in the areas outside of Melbourne. Like we often don't get those voices. We don't get the voices of migrant communities well represented. There isn't a lot of cultural diversity in there. I mean, I'm saying this as a white guy, but I'm not seeing it in the disability rights movement nationally. It really worries me that disability rights movement isn't looking like its own community at the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That thing around poverty too, that half of us as disabled people live in poverty, which is what you're talking about postcodes, right? But when you live, among other people like yourself and you hear people's stories every day, one of the people that I sort of activist with, Kelly Cox, worked in an Aboriginal land council for years and years and years and lives in, on community, came from community in Taree, is still really embedded in community and understands what it's like for Aboriginal people living in those regions. Same thing as, when I was in a MHU a couple of weeks ago and a week ago, and there's people there who have really, they're never going to be people who are actually handpicked to be on a board, or they don't have the luxury of being on a board because they're too busy surviving, or they're just too unwell, or they need significant care and support just to be able to stay alive. So there's really, they don't even know that our organisations exist. It's become this really kind of privileged thing. So I think we need to look for ways to uphold the voices of disabled people wherever they are, whoever they are, but people who are really, the disadvantaged people first, and people who are, I guess, connected with other people with disabilities that are like themselves.
Yeah. Exactly. Wow.
Jonathan's going to kick us off now because I'm just looking at the time.
Yeah.
I think we need to get something that can amplify our voices.
Let our voices be heard.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if where can people find out more about NDIS crawl and the direct actions that are going on at the moment, Craig?
So there is a event page which I can share with this group. Pat, I might send that to Jonathan after that. But if you actually just look at the NDIS hashtag either on Facebook or Twitter, and what's really important is that everything we do under that, we're also sending to @NDIS CEO and @Stuart Robert MP. But yeah, it's been good to be part of a conversation with you guys. I'd be happy to do it again from time to time.
Thank you very much, Craig and Samantha, for joining us.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
It's been a real pleasure picking your brain. Thank you.
And Samantha.
Thanks so much, David.
You two are the people I aim to be when I'm your age, and for young people, I know the word inspiration is a loaded term in our community, but you inspired next generation of disability advocates. So thank you for honoring us with your
Thanks.
presence.
I'm only going to take being called inspirational by you, Jonathan. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
I think disabled people can call each other inspirational. It's just we don't like other people doing
Yeah,
it.
that's right.
So that receive
Yeah, in that
the
case,
thanks.
You're
all you
good.
guys are an inspiration. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. Okay, take care, people.
Cheers.
Bye.
Thank
Okay,
you very
thanks,
much.
Thank you
And
very
if you
much.
ever want to
Bye.
go back on and you need to tell us anything or anything changes, don't hesitate to
Comment.
to actually talk to Jonathan to come back on with us.
Yeah, guys, if you want to be a part of the podcast, let us know. Give us a comment. Shout out to
Cheers.
John. I'll go from
Yeah.
there.
Thanks.
Thank you,
Thanks.
guys.
if anything needs to be
Okay.
heard.
Bye.
Okay,
Thank you
bye.
very much, Frank.
Thank you.
So you've been watching CripChat, your weekly podcast on everything disability. Join us next week for more CripChat.
You guys, bye.